and you can see many of his works in the local galleries. And he is also instructor at Primeter College, Georgia Primeter College. He teaches sculpture and fundamental art and art appreciation and drawings and many other courses. Okay? So let's welcome him forward.
Okay, well, this is sort of a condensed from about 4 or 5 lectures that I usually give to my art appreciation class, talking about the basics of what makes artwork. Now, I've come in and I've added a bunch of photography. I usually have photography in there, but not as much as I've got in this one. And I've taken a bunch of paintings and sculpture out, because although there's going to be painting and sculpture in here, it's in some ways it's easier to talk about the whole idea of Western art, talking about the things that mostly have been done for 600-700 years. To start off with, thinking about what modern art is, or what art is, this Maurice Denis, who is a French author, basically said that remember that a picture or a painting, photograph even there, before being the subject that it portrays, the war horse, the nude woman, or some other story, is essentially just a plain surface covered with colors or images in a certain order. It's not the object it represents. René Magritte, in 1928 and 29, he painted this painting, and you don't want to hear my French, but it's the translation in English is "This is not a pipe." It's painted on the painting, written on the painting. The treachery of images is the title of the painting, but that's what it says. This is not a pipe. And he comes back later and says, the famous pipe, how people reproached me for it, and yet could you stuff my pipe? No, it's just a representation, is it not? So if I had written on my picture, this is a pipe, I'd have been lying. And you can't forget that whenever you're looking at artwork. All artwork is a lie. And Picasso said, it's a lie that helps us to understand the truth, but it's a lie. It's not real. To get into the mechanics of how you use the elements of design to make art, this is what I'm going to be talking about and giving examples of all these different parts. Point and line, shape and form, mass and volume, value or tone, direction or movement, texture and pattern, and color or hue. Start out with line. The function of line is to outline a form. Contour line implies a direction of movement, sometimes creates pattern and texture, shading and modeling. And I'm going to show you some examples. Keith Haring was a street artist, and he was just doing graffiti on the street. And he lived in New York, and these billboards were advertising in the subways, and they would come in, and when they'd take the old advertising down, that was one crew, and they'd usually do it in the middle of the night. And a few hours later, the second crew would come around and put the new advertising up. And while it was up, it was black boards, and he took chalk and he just rode the subways and stopped at every stop and did drawings. Eventually, an art gallery, art director, somebody saw it and picked him up and said, okay, we want you to do this on canvas, on drawing, on paper, and sell your artwork. Don't want it just covered up. And he became very famous in a few years, but he died young too. You can see it's...
Excuse me. If any of you has questions, why, you know, in some of them, just raise your hand and ask Don to repeat. For example, the earlier, the line, the, you know, the things. If you have questions, want Don to explain a little more, just raise your hand.
Sure. Yeah, if you have any questions concerning the meaning of those terms, just raise your hands. Okay, we will try our best to explain.
And so basically, Herring is with his drawings, he's telling stories. A winged man with his being held by probably the hands of God, and he's being barked at. You know what's real. In the 16th century, as printing was becoming more common for artists, here in the Western world, it was 1492 before they figured out how to print the Gutenberg Bible. In China, y'all had printing a lot longer before we did, but it was in 1485, I think it was. And this is a print that Albrecht Dürer, who is a German-Austrian artist, and he made this image on a plate and then printed it. And it's all lines, individual lines. The lines create everything, the shading of the form, a lot of texture. He had never seen a rhinoceros. He was going on somebody's description of what a rhinoceros looked like. And so it's a little bit fanciful, but it looks very similar to a rhinoceros, even though it's not quite what it looks like. But it's all line. Most artists use hatching and cross-hatching to get tone and value, whereas as a photographer, you're familiar with the grayscale, but if you're an artist working in line, basically you make your grayscale with line because you can't get those nice even tones that you get in a photograph. Here's, for instance, Charles White did a drawing, and you can see the light and the dark and the forms being represented just through line, and it's doing layers and layers of line to get the darker areas, and where there's just a few layers, the highlights show up. So you see the figures, you see what's going on just by creating the line without any color or anything. Kathy Kollwitz, in two different examples, she's using fairly fine lines, and it's a lot more introspective. She's sitting there thinking and drawing herself, and the lines are very descriptive. On this one, she's using a crayon. On the top one, it was probably a stylus, because I believe it's a print, and so it changed and was applied to a plate just like Dürer's piece and then printed. But on the bottom one, that's a drawing, and she was using a crayon, so it was soft. It was probably charcoal crayon, and you've got it's not as harsh. You get more of an emotional softness out of those soft-edged lines. you've probably seen the painting that this turned into, but before he did the painting, Van Gogh, he used a pen and ink, and he drew out Starry Night. To him, it was all about the movement in the sky, and so each one of those is a either a pen stroke, or in some cases he came in with a thinned down ink to get some of the brown tones. Those were on a brush, but it's still all line. He's not applying big areas of color. He's applying individual lines to get that. And then when he came in and he started painting the picture, he translated that into paint. Still, it's individual brush strokes rather than trying to brush it all out and blend everything real evenly. Still very much about line. Another way of using line, Henry Matisse became much more lyrical. Instead of having all that energy that Van Gogh was showing, by having those short little lines, he's got long lines. It doesn't look very realistic or very naturalistic, but it has a lyricism. I mean, she's dancing, she's happy, and it's because the lines kind of flow, and not all of them touch. Some of them, they have spaces between them, which implies a sense of freedom and movement. Jackson Pollock, 20th century artist, came in, and for him, the line is not about drawing the line, it's about making the line with paint on the brush. And so it's all about getting those, translating the motions that he as an artist is making, and he's being very, very careful. It may look like it's not very careful and he's just splattering, but it's all about translating that gesture of his arm and the brush onto the canvas, so that you get a field which, you know, it looks fairly uniform. There's a lot of depth there because he used different colors. So you're going into that that spatial place that he created on the canvas through applying layer after layer of strokes of paint. In photography, Ansel Adams, I mean, look at the photograph here in the switching yard of the railroad. There's contrails in the sky. There's the vertical lines of the poles with the switches in it. Everything lights and switches on them. There's the lines of the tracks. This is all about line. He wants you to see through a photograph. He wants you to see that confluence of that intersection of where all of these lines are meeting, the lines on the ground, the lines on the poles, and the lines in the sky, and how they're different. Andreas Feining photographed the Brooklyn Bridge back in the early parts of the 20th century. I don't have a date for either one of these, but this was probably sometime in the late 30s, 40s, maybe even into the 50s, where that was probably in the teens or the 20s. And although that arch or pair of archways for the bridge is front and center, it's all about the lines leading to that architecture that is what the photographer is interested in showing you. A couple more recent pieces. Harry Callahan, he found a pond with some marsh grass on it outside of Detroit, and so it becomes all about line. Most of the lines are straight, but then you've got all these little curly lines that are the reflections in the water. Russell Wong is photographing the bamboo, and again, it's all about all those repeated vertical lines. Sometimes artists will use shape and create line by how they put shape together. You know, these are two poppy blossoms, and because they're stuck together, you start getting all these lines, very organic lines. She wasn't interested in showing you the whole flower. She wanted you to see the details, which in this case is where shapes come up against each other and create lines. I can't remember what kind of flower that is, but again, it's all about getting these, she's zooming in, trying to get you to see all those lines that are reinforced by shapes being stuck together and intersect. Robert Mapplethorpe, he takes a calla lily, and he's not showing you the whole thing. He's just showing you parts of it. And because you can't see the whole thing, you don't think of it as a whole thing. You think of it as the parts. You see those lines, the line of the stem, the line of the pistil, the line of the blooms as they come down and intersect with each other. And it's about using line to direct your eye, because your eye follows the lines that you see in the image. Mapplethorpe said this was, I think, in 1988, he said he just started playing with flowers. He got a bunch of flowers, and he started playing with lights, and that's the way he learned about what he wanted to photograph. He didn't, there wasn't a job to photograph flowers or anything. He got some flowers and he said, okay, I'm going to see what I can do. What if? And there's one more kind of line that is really important to the artist, and that's the implied line, the line that's not really there, that's not visible. Whoops. In Raphael's Madonna of the Fields, painted in the 16th century, the Virgin, and I put the lines in that so you can see, but the Virgin is looking down at John the Baptist. The Virgin is looking down at the Christ child. You can't actually see her pupils, but you can tell from the shape of her eyelids, you can tell that she's looking down, and both of them are in her field of vision. And it's kind of a dark slide, I know, but this staff in John the Baptist's hand, which is an attribute that anybody who saw this in the Renaissance when this was painted, anybody who saw this, they knew exactly who these characters were, because they have all, John the Baptist is always clothed in a robe, and you can't see it very well here, but it's an animal robe, because he lived in the wild. He didn't live in the city. Mary is always, she's always clothed in red and blue. Red for symbolizing being here in this mortal body on earth, and blue because she's the mother in heaven as well. So she's always in red and blue. And of course they do have halos, and they don't show up, her halo shows up better than either of John's or the Christ child's. But it's that implied line, which is basically a triangle, and the whole composition is a pyramid shape, which keeps your eye going around looking at these figures, and it keeps you concentrating on what's going on in the middle of the picture. But within that, you've got all this energy, because it's going around and around. John and the Christ child are looking at each other. She's looking at them. That John's staff is pointing right up to her head. And so it's all, your eye keeps following those lines even though they're not painted in there. Although, well, the staff is in there. But when these were painted, they were painted as a pair. They were portraits of wealthy, when I say wealthy, wealthy middle class people in Flanders, in modern day Holland, and they were just starting, to get some money. It was a middle class was new. Middle class hadn't existed before, and it's from trade. And so they wanted the things that the noblemen had, the people that had been rich, all the time, had the power and wealth. And so before they got married, because this pair got married, they had their portraits painted, and these probably hung maybe one over here and one over there, and probably a fireplace in the middle. But the implied line, they're looking at each other. He's reaching out his hand. She's holding a rose which is cut off a little bit. So there's a give and take going back and forth, and it's that implied line, and it's called a pendant portrait when you have a pair like that, but they weren't supposed to be seen side by side. They were probably on either side of a fireplace, or a door or window, something like that. And the really sad thing about this is these two paintings are in two different museums now. So they're never together again. In photography, I'm not going to give you a whole bunch of examples, but here is the famous pioneer in filmmaking, as photographed by Walter Limoux, and he's looking at the film. You've got implied lines here. The line of the film itself, which we know is going to be those sequential images, which is telling so much of the story, but he's looking at it, and so you look at this, and he's not even in focus. The film is in focus, and so talking about a portrait, and the photographer is saying what's really important about this man is not the way he looks, but what he did. There's one more kind of implied line that you need to be aware of, and Leonardo and Piero, both in these done in the Renaissance, Christ is rising from the grave, and he's looking at you. He's looking right at you. And the Mona Lisa is looking at you too. Now they're saying a little bit different things, but it's involving you as viewer as part of the scene. You're there with them. And you're meant to be included, because part of the story of what the artist is saying is you're here with me. And think about, what I'm saying. And of course what Christ is saying is a good bit different from what the Mona Lisa is saying. I mean, we think about her enigmatic smile and everything, but it's that very direct connection that we as viewers have when we look at these paintings. Here are Dorothea Lange in the Depression. She did a lot of photographs all over the country of the displaced, the disenfranchised people that had basically were living on the fringe during the Depression. And she said it's called "Damaged Child" is the title she gave to it, in Shacktown, which happens to be just outside of Elm Grove, Oklahoma. And that little girl's looking at you, and you know, she doesn't understand everything, and you know she doesn't understand, but she knows enough that somebody is here doing something, taking her picture. Brasai, who is a Hungarian photographer who spent almost his entire career in Paris, photographing Paris. And this was a self-portrait he did near the end of his life. And he's making it very obvious what it is that he does and what you're supposed to get from it. You're supposed to be, he's looking at you when he photographs you, and in turn, you're looking at his photographs. You're looking at the things that his eyes are seeing. It's all about that connection in the eye. So it's making eye contact, if you will. Vertical line implies a certain amount of power. I mean, when we stand up, we're vertical, and we have a certain amount of power when we're vertical. You know, if you look at it in basic psychological terms, if I'm not going to be a threat to you if I'm lying down, but I'm potentially a threat to you if I'm standing up. So you're aware of things that are vertical. It also talks about ascent, you know, standing up, going up, flying into the sky, or going down. In sculpture, Konstantin Brancusi's Bird in Space. Now he did about 26 different versions of Bird in Space. This was not the latest one, and it wasn't the earliest one. Some of the really early ones, you can see that they look like a bird. You can see the beak, you can see the head, the eye sometimes, but as he made each one of them, each one became up to a certain point, in sort of about halfway through, and you can't see it, but it became, there's still just a suggestion right at the very tip there of the object, the form that is in the earlier ones is the beak or the eye, but it's become a metaphor for what a bird does, flying in the air, flying up in the air. And he's gotten rid of all the stuff that you don't need to know. You don't need to know about the wings. You don't need to know about the feathers. All he wants is for you to concentrate on that flight, that movement in the air, and it's curved, so it's graceful. It's not like a rocket. It's got a certain grace to it by having that curve in there. Martin Puryear, who is a black sculptor, did this piece a few years ago, and he titled it A Ladder for Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington is considered by some blacks to be, he was a sort of a pioneer, but it was not very much in the, he did a lot of things for blacks. Started a school, did a lot of things, but a lot of blacks look at what he did and say, well, you did it as a Tom. You pandered to the white classes, and you didn't really do everything you could have done. And so a lot of blacks looking at it now look back at Booker T. Washington, and they don't see the good things that he did. They see the fact that he didn't go far enough. And Martin Puryear had no idea that this was going to get anywhere near as much controversy as it created, because he was just reading Booker T. Washington as some of the rungs on that ladder, and you can't really see the ladder doesn't touch the ground. It doesn't touch anything up there. It's two long pieces of wood for those uprights that are, you know, carved out of basically saplings, and it follows the curve of the tree. It's suspended by pieces of fishing line, nylon line, so it's not touching the ground, it's not touching the end. It's hard to get on a ladder like that. And it tapers as it goes to the top. It's not, it's about this wide down here, a little bit above the floor. It's about the size of a normal ladder. But when you go, I think it's 26 feet tall. When you get up to the top there, it's that far apart. So you're seeing a lot of, it's an optical illusion on how far it's going. It's not going, and when you add all of that stuff together, it's got those upright lines, and it's got all the rungs, and he's saying, it looks like you're going a lot farther than you really are, and you don't necessarily have a really firm base there on the ground, and so he's saying, you know, where is our situation in culture? I mean, there's not anything really firm there. It doesn't look like a ladder that, you know, as heavy as I am, I wouldn't want to climb up that ladder very far, because I'd be afraid that it was going to break. It doesn't look like the strongest ladder in the world, and that's what he's saying about the culture, and when he made this, and like I said, because he titled it A Ladder for Booker T. Washington, a whole bunch of the black community got really upset with him because they look at Booker T. Washington as not exactly not a traitor, but maybe a collaborator with the white culture of the time. Sorry, wrong way. Alfred Stieglitz photographed a lot of photographs, lot of images of the skyscrapers in New York, and it's almost all vertical lines. I mean, there are sections, but it's just like a ladder. It's taking you up, and he's talking about, you know, he came out of the late 19th century, and he was into the 20th, this 1932, and think of the changes that were happening at that time, and he's trying to capture it in his photography. Wrong way. Horizontal line, it implies gravity, a certain calmness, a certain tranquility. In the 17th century Dutch landscapes, and there are a lot of them, in Holland or Flanders, it's all flat. Most of it is land that has been reclaimed from the sea, so it's all very flat. The occasional church, human buildings, those are the only thing that get your eye and start taking you up into the sky, up to heaven. The rest of it's clouds. And Richard Long in the 20th century, a British sculptor, he uses stone, and he takes the stone and arranges it. And these are a couple different pieces that he had done, and basically just made them long horizontal lines. Now the photographs here show them as a diagonal, but you're seeing it, depending on where you come at it, you're seeing it either as something parallel to the horizon or as a track walking towards the horizon usually, and so it's about being down to earth. Hiroshi Sugimoto has done a whole series of photographs of different bodies of water around the world. They look amazingly like each other, although each one is slightly different. I only put the one here because it would get kind of boring if you saw every one of them on a screen like this. Now in person you start getting all the wonderful details of the texture in there, but the composition in all his photographs of his bodies of water, of the oceans and the seas that he's photographed, the composition is the same. The sea is a little bit bigger than, it's not quite half and half. It's just above the center point, and there's nothing in them except the ocean and the air, and that horizon line, because Edward Weston took his model, who was his wife, and in this case he has her half floating, half lying on a step underneath the edge of the water there, and it's about that horizontal movement again. She seems perfectly at rest, and it seems almost unnatural to see a human figure over this sort of abyss, but she's calm, just lying back, and you wonder what's going to happen. Now the curved line, I could have put this under the section where I talk about curved lines as well, but I think the focal point of this piece is obviously the human. We all look at humans before we look at other things if there's a human to be seen. And so, but the curved line pulls around and draws you right to her. And it sort of emphasizes the fact that she's in that horizontal position. Diagonal line is an implication of movement from one state to another. The diagonal usually attracts your eye, creates a feeling of transition. A lot of artists use diagonal lines. I put two different pieces by Edgar Degas in here for two different reasons. Again, the people that would have seen these paintings in the late 19th century, they would have known what these little ballet dancers meant. They would have known